7. There was no lamp in the hall, but by the dim light of the kitchen candle, which the girl had brought upstairs with her, I saw an elderly lady steal noiselessly out of a back room on the ground floor. She cast one viperish look at me as I entered the hall, but said nothing, and went slowly upstairs without returning my bow. My familiarity with Marian's journal sufficiently assured me that the elderly lady was Madame Fosco. The servant led me to the room which the Countess had just left. I entered it and found myself face to face with the Count. He was still in his evening dress, except his coat, which he had thrown across a chair. His shirt sleeves were turned up at the wrists, but no higher. A carpet bag was on one side of him and a box on the other. Books, papers, and articles of wearing apparel were scattered about the room. On a table at one side of the door stood the cage, so well known to me by description, which contained his white mice. The canaries and the cockatoo were probably in some other room. He was seated before the box, packing it when I went in, and rose with some papers in his hand to receive me. His face still betrayed plain traces of the shock that had overwhelmed him at the opera. His fat cheeks hung loose, his cold gray eyes were furtively vigilant. His voice, look, and manner were all sharply suspicious alike as he advanced a step to meet me, and requested with distant civility that I would take a chair. "You come here on business, sir," he said. "I am at a loss to know what that business can possibly be." The unconcealed curiosity, with which he looked hard in my face while he spoke, convinced me that I had passed unnoticed by him at the opera. He had seen Pesca first, and from that moment till he left the theater, he had evidently seen nothing else. My name would necessarily suggest to him that I had not come into his house with other than a hostile purpose towards himself, but he appeared to be utterly ignorant thus far of the real nature of my errand. "I am fortunate in finding you here tonight," I said. "You seem to be on the point of taking a journey. Is your business connected with my journey?" "In some degree." "In what degree?" "Do you know where I am going to?" "No. I only know why you are leaving London." He slipped by me with the quickness of thought, locked the door, and put the key in his pocket. "You and I, Mr. Hartright, are excellently well acquainted with one another by reputation," he said. "Did it, by any chance, occur to you when you came to this house that I was not the sort of man you could trifle with?" "It did occur to me," I replied. "And I have not come to trifle with you. I am here on a matter of life and death, and if that door which you have locked was open at this moment, nothing you could say or do would induce me to pass through it." I walked farther into the room and stood opposite to him on the rug before the fireplace. He drew a chair in front of the door and sat down on it, with his left arm resting on the table. The cage with the white mice was close to him, and the little creatures scampered out of their sleeping place as his heavy arm shook the table, and peered at him through the gaps in the smartly painted wires. "On a matter of life and death," he repeated to himself. "Those words are more serious, perhaps, than you think." "What do you mean?" "What I say." The perspiration broke out thickly on his broad forehead. His left hand stole over the edge of the table. There was a drawer in it with a lock, and the key was in the lock. His finger and thumb closed over the key, but did not turn it. "So you know why I am leaving London," he went on. "Tell me the reason, if you please." He turned the key and unlocked the drawer as he spoke. "I can do better than that," I replied. "I can show you the reason, if you like." "How can you show it?" "You have got your coat off," I said. "Roll up the shirt sleeve on your left arm, and you will see it there." The same livid leaden change passed over his face which I had seen pass over it at the theater. The deadly glitter in his eyes shone steady and straight into mine. He said nothing, but his left hand slowly opened the table drawer and softly slipped into it. The harsh grating noise of something heavy that he was moving unseen to me sounded for a moment, then ceased. The silence that followed was so intense that the faint ticking nibble of the white mice at their wires was distinctly audible where I stood. My life hung by a thread, and I knew it. At that final moment I thought with his mind, I felt with his fingers. I was as certain as if I had seen it of what he kept hidden from me in the drawer. "Wait a little," I said. "You have got the door locked, you see I don't move, you see my hands are empty." "Wait a little." I have something more to say. You have said enough, he replied, with a sudden composure so unnatural and so ghastly that it tried my nerves as no outbreak of violence could have tried them. I want one moment for my own thoughts, if you please. Do you guess what I am thinking about? Perhaps I do. I am thinking, he remarked quietly, whether I shall add to the disorder in this room by scattering your brains about the fireplace. If I had moved at that moment, I saw in his face that he would have done it. I advise you to read 2 lines of writing which I have about me, I rejoined, before you finally decide that question. The proposal appeared to excite his curiosity. He nodded his head. I took Pesca's acknowledgement of the receipt of my letter out of my pocketbook, handed it to him at arm's length, and returned to my former position in front of the fireplace. He read the lines aloud. Your letter is received. If I don't hear from you before the time you mention, I will break the seal when the clock strikes. Another man in his position would have needed some explanation of those words. The Count felt no such necessity. One reading of the note showed him the precaution that I had taken as plainly as if he had been present at the time when I adopted it. The expression of his face changed on the instant, and his hand came out of the drawer empty. I don't lock up my drawer, Mr. Hartright, he said, and I don't say that I may not scatter your brains about the fireplace yet. But I am a just man even to my enemy, and I will acknowledge beforehand that they are cleverer brains than I thought them. Come to the point, sir. You want something of me. I do, and I mean to have it. On conditions. On no conditions. His hand dropped into the drawer again. Bah. We are traveling in a circle, he said, and those clever brains of yours are in danger again. Your tone is deplorably imprudent, sir, moderated on the spot. The risk of shooting you on the place where you stand is less to me than the risk of letting you out of this house, except on conditions that I dictate and approve. You have not got my lamented friend to deal with now. You are face to face with Fosco. If the lives of 20 Mr. Hartrights were the stepping stones to my safety, over all those stones I would go, sustained by my sublime indifference, self-balanced by my impenetrable calm. Respect me if you love your own life. I summon you to answer 3 questions before you open your lips again. Hear them, they are necessary to this interview. Answer them, they are necessary to me. He held up one finger of his right hand. First question, he said. You come here possessed of information which may be true or may be false. Where did you get it? I decline to tell you. No matter, I shall find out. If that information is true, mind, I say, with the whole force of my resolution, if you are making your market of it here by treachery of your own or by treachery of some other man. I note that circumstance for future use in my memory, which forgets nothing, and proceed. He held up another finger. Second question. Those lines you invited me to read are without signature. Who wrote them? A man whom I have every reason to depend on, and whom you have every reason to fear. My answer reached him to some purpose. His left hand trembled audibly in the drawer. How long do you give me, he asked, putting his third question in a quieter tone, before the clock strikes and the seal is broken? Time enough for you to come to my terms, I replied. Give me a plainer answer, Mr. Hartright. What hour is the clock to strike? 9 tomorrow morning. 9 tomorrow morning. Yes, yes, your trap is laid for me before, can get my passport regulated and leave London. It is not earlier, I suppose. We will see about that presently. I can keep you hostage here, and bargain with you to send for your letter before I let you go. In the meantime, be so good next as to mention your terms. You shall hear them. They are simple and soon stated. You know whose interests I represent in coming here. He smiled with the most supreme composure, and carelessly waved his right hand. I consent to hazard a guess, he said jeeringly. A lady's interests, of course. My wife's interests. He looked at me with the first honest expression that had crossed his face in my presence, an expression of blank amazement. I could see that I sank in his estimation as a dangerous man from that moment. He shut up the drawer at once, folded his arms over his breast, and listened to me with a smile of satirical attention. You are well enough aware, I went on, of the course which my inquiries have taken for many months past, to know that any attempted denial of plain facts will be quite useless in my presence. You are guilty of an infamous conspiracy, and the gain of a fortune of £10,000 was your motive for it." He said nothing, but his face became overclouded suddenly by a lowering anxiety. "Keep your gain," I said. His face lightened again immediately, and his eyes opened on me in wider and wider astonishment. "I am not here to disgrace myself by bargaining for money which has passed through your hands and which has been the price of a vile crime. Gently, Mr. Hartright. Your moral claptraps have an excellent effect in England. Keep them for yourself and your own countrymen, if you please. The £10,000 was a legacy left to my excellent wife by the late Mr. Fairley. Place the affair on those grounds, and I will discuss it if you like. To a man of my sentiments, however, the subject is deplorably sordid. I prefer to pass it over. I invite you to resume the discussion of your terms. What do you demand? In the first place, I demand a full confession of the conspiracy, written and signed in my presence by yourself." He raised his finger again. "One," he said, checking me off with the steady attention of a practical man. "In the second place, I demand a plain proof, which does not depend on your personal asseveration, of the date at which my wife left Blackwater Park and traveled to London." So, you can lay your finger, I see, on the weak place," he remarked composedly. "Any more?" "At present, no more." "Good. You have mentioned your terms, now listen to mine. The responsibility to myself of admitting what you are pleased to call the conspiracy is less, perhaps, upon the whole, than the responsibility of laying you dead on that hearthrug. Let us say that I meet your proposal, on my own conditions. The statement you demand of me shall be written, and the plain proof shall be produced. You call a letter from my late lamented friend informing me of the day and hour of his wife's arrival in London, written, signed, and dated by himself. A proof, I suppose. I can give you this. I can also send you to the man of whom I hired the carriage to fetch my visitor from the railway, on the day when she arrived. His order book may help you to your date, even if his coachman who drove me proves to be of no use. These things I can do, and will do on conditions. I recite them. First condition: Madame Fosco and I leave this house when and how we please, without interference of any kind on your part. Second condition: you wait here, in company with me, to see my agent, who is coming at 7 o'clock in the morning to regulate my affairs. You give my agent a written order to the man who has got your sealed letter to resign his possession of it. You wait here till my agent places that letter unopened in my hands, and you then allow me 1 clear half-hour to leave the house, after which you resume your own freedom of action and go where you please. Third condition: you give me the satisfaction of a gentleman for your intrusion into my private affairs, and for the language you have allowed yourself to use to me at this conference. The time and place abroad to be fixed in a letter from my hand when I am safe on the continent, and that letter to contain a strip of paper measuring accurately the length of my sword. Those are my terms. Inform me if you accept them, yes or no. The extraordinary mixture of prompt decision, far-sighted cunning, and mountebank bravado in this speech staggered me for a moment, and only for a moment. The one question to consider was whether I was justified or not in possessing myself of the means of establishing Laura's identity at the cost of allowing the scoundrel who had robbed her of it to escape me with impunity. I knew that the motive of securing the just recognition of my wife in the birthplace from which she had been driven out as an impostor, and of publicly erasing the lie that still profaned her mother's tombstone, was far purer, in its freedom from all taint of evil passion, than the vindictive motive which had mingled itself with my purpose from the first. And yet I cannot honestly say that my own moral convictions were strong enough to decide the struggle in me by themselves. They were helped by my remembrance of Sir Percival's death. How awfully, at the last moment, had the working of the retribution there been snatched from my feeble hands. What right had I to decide, in my poor mortal ignorance of the future, that this man, too, must escape with impunity because he escaped me? I thought of these things, perhaps with the superstition inherent in my nature, perhaps with a sense worthier of me than superstition. It was hard, when I had fastened my hold on him at last, to loosen it again of my own accord, but I forced myself to make the sacrifice. In plainer words, I determined to be guided by the one higher motive of which I was certain, the motive of serving the cause of Laura and the cause of truth. "I accept your conditions," I said, "with one reservation on my part." "What reservation may that be?" he asked. "It refers to the sealed letter," I answered. "I require you to destroy it unopened in my presence as soon as it is placed in your hands." My object in making this stipulation was simply to prevent him from carrying away written evidence of the nature of my communication with Pesca. The fact of my communication he would necessarily discover when I gave the address to his agent in the morning. But he could make no use of it on his own unsupported testimony, even if he really ventured to try the experiment, which need excite in me the slightest apprehension on Pesca's account. "I grant your reservation," he replied, after considering the question gravely for a minute or two. "It is not worth dispute. The letter shall be destroyed when it comes into my hands." He rose, as he spoke, from the chair in which he had been sitting opposite to me up to this time. With one effort, he appeared to free his mind from the whole pressure on it of the interview between us thus far. "Oof," he cried, stretching his arms luxuriously. "The skirmish was hot while it lasted. Take a seat, Mr. Hartright. We meet as mortal enemies hereafter. Let us, like gallant gentlemen, exchange polite attentions in the meantime. Permit me to take the liberty of calling for my wife." He unlocked and opened the door. "Eleanor," he called out in his deep voice. The lady of the viperish face came in. "Madame Fosco, Mr. Hartright," said the Count, introducing us with easy dignity. "My angel," he went on, addressing his wife, "will your labors of packing up allow you time to make me some nice strong coffee? I have writing business to transact with Mr. Hartright, and I require the full possession of my intelligence to do justice to myself." Madame Fosco bowed her head twice, once sternly to me, once submissively to her husband, and glided out of the room. The Count walked to a writing table near the window, opened his desk, and took from it several quires of paper and a bundle of quill pens. He scattered the pens about the table, so that they might lie ready in all directions to be taken up when wanted, and then cut the paper into a heap of narrow slips, of the form used by professional writers for the press. "I shall make this a remarkable document," he said, looking at me over his shoulder. "Habits of literary composition are perfectly familiar to me. One of the rarest of all the intellectual accomplishments that a man can possess is the grand faculty of arranging his ideas. Immense privilege. I possess it. Do you?" He marched backwards and forwards in the room until the coffee appeared, humming to himself and marking the places at which obstacles occurred in the arrangement of his ideas by striking his forehead from time to time with the palm of his hand. The enormous audacity with which he seized on the situation in which I placed him, and made it the pedestal on which his vanity mounted for the one cherished purpose of self-display, mastered my astonishment by main force. Sincerely as I loathed the man, the prodigious strength of his character, even in its most trivial aspects, impressed me in spite of myself. The coffee was brought in by Madame Fosco. He kissed her hand in grateful acknowledgement and escorted her to the door, returned, poured out a cup of coffee for himself, and took it to the writing table. "May I offer you some coffee, Mr. Hartright?" he said before he sat down. I declined. "What? You think I shall poison you," he said gaily. "The English intellect is sound, so far as it goes," he continued, seating himself at the table, "but it has one grave defect: it is always cautious in the wrong place." He dipped his pen in the ink, placed the first slip of paper before him with a thump of his hand on the desk, cleared his throat, and began. He wrote with great noise and rapidity, in so large and bold a hand, and with such wide spaces between the lines, that he reached the bottom of the slip in not more than 2 minutes certainly from the time when he started at the top. Each slip, as he finished, it was paged, and tossed over his shoulder out of his way on the floor. When his first pen was worn out, that went over his shoulder too, and he pounced on a second from the supply scattered about the table. Slip after slip, by dozens, by 50s, by hundreds, flew over his shoulders on either side of him till he had snowed himself up in paper all round his chair. Hour after hour passed, and there I sat watching, there he sat writing. He never stopped, except to sip his coffee, and when that was exhausted, to smack his forehead from time to time. 1 o'clock struck, 2, 3, 4, and still the slips flew about all round him. Still the untiring pen scraped its way ceaselessly from top to bottom of the page. Still the white chaos of paper rose higher and higher all round his chair. At 4 o'clock, I heard a sudden splutter of the pen, indicative of the flourish with which he signed his name. "Bravo!" he cried, springing to his feet with the activity of a young man, and looking me straight in the face with a smile of superb triumph. "Done, Mr. Hartright," he announced with a self-renovating thump of his fist on his broad breast. "Done to my own profound satisfaction, to your profound astonishment, when you read what I have written. The subject is exhausted, the man Fosco is not. I proceed to the arrangement of my slips, to the revision of my slips, to the reading of my slips, addressed emphatically to your private ear. 4 o'clock has just struck. Good. Arrangement, revision, reading from 4 to 5. Short snooze of restoration for myself from 5 to 6. Final preparations from 6 to 7. Affair of agent and sealed letter from 7 to 8. At 8 en route. Behold the programme." He sat down cross-legged on the floor among his papers, strung them together with a bodkin and a piece of string, revised them, wrote all the titles and honors by which he was personally distinguished at the head of the first page, and then read the manuscript to me with loud theatrical emphasis and profuse theatrical gesticulation. The reader will have an opportunity, ere long, of forming his own opinion of the document. It will be sufficient to mention here that it answered my purpose. He next wrote me the address of the person from whom he had hired the fly, and handed me Sir Percival's letter. It was dated from Hampshire on the 25th of July, and it announced the journey of Lady Glyde to London on the 26th. Thus, on the very day, the 25th, when the doctor's certificate declared that she had died in St. John's Wood, she was alive by Sir Percival's own showing at Blackwater, and on the day after, she was to take a journey. When the proof of that journey was obtained from the flyman, the evidence would be complete. 5:15, said the Count, looking at his watch. Time for my restorative snooze. I personally resemble Napoleon the Great, as you may have remarked, Mr. Hartright. I also resemble that immortal man in my power of commanding sleep at will. Excuse me one moment. I will summon Madame Fosco to keep you from feeling dull. Knowing, as well as he did, that he was summoning Madame Fosco to ensure my not leaving the house while he was asleep, I made no reply, and occupied myself in tying up the papers which he had placed in my possession. The lady came in, cool, pale, and venomous as ever. "Amuse Mr. Hartright, my angel," said the Count. He placed a chair for her, kissed her hand for the second time, withdrew to a sofa, and in 3 minutes was as peacefully and happily asleep as the most virtuous man in existence. Madame Fosco took a book from the table, sat down, and looked at me with the steady, vindictive malice of a woman who never forgot and never forgave. "I have been listening to your conversation with my husband," she said. "If I had been in his place, I would have laid you dead on the hearthrug." With those words, she opened her book, and never looked at me or spoke to me from that time till the time when her husband woke. He opened his eyes and rose from the sofa, accurately to an hour from the time when he had gone to sleep. "I feel infinitely refreshed," he remarked. "Elinor, my good wife, are you already upstairs?" "That is well. My little packing here can be completed in 10 minutes, my traveling dress assumed in 10 minutes more. What remains before the agent comes?" He looked about the room and noticed the cage with his white mice in it. "Ah," he cried piteously, "a last laceration of my sympathies still remains. My innocent pets, my little cherished children, what am I to do with them? For the present we are settled nowhere. For the present we travel incessantly, the less baggage we carry the better for ourselves. My cockatoo, my canaries, and my little mice, who will cherish them when their good papa is gone?" He walked about the room deep in thought. He had not been at all troubled about writing his confession, but he was visibly perplexed and distressed about the far more important question of the disposal of his pets. After long consideration, he suddenly sat down again at the writing table. "An idea," he exclaimed. "I will offer my canaries and my cockatoo to this vast metropolis. My agent shall present them in my name to the Zoological Gardens of London. The document that describes them shall be drawn out on the spot." He began to write, repeating the words as they flowed from his pen. Number 1. Cockatoo of transcendent plumage, attraction of himself to all visitors of taste. Number 2. Canaries of unrivaled vivacity and intelligence, worthy of the Garden of Eden, worthy also of the garden in the Regent's Park. Homage to British zoology. Offered by Fosco. The pen spluttered again, and the flourish was attached to his signature. "Count, you have not included the mice," said Madame Fosco. He left the table, took her hand, and placed it on his heart. "All human resolution, Aline," he said solemnly, "has its limits. My limits are inscribed on that document. I cannot part with my white mice. Bear with me, my angel, and remove them to their traveling cage upstairs." "Admirable tenderness," said Madame Fosco, admiring her husband, with a last viperish look in my direction. She took up the cage carefully and left the room. The Count looked at his watch. In spite of his resolute assumption of composure, he was getting anxious for the agent's arrival. The candles had long since been extinguished, and the sunlight of the new morning poured into the room. It was not till 5 minutes past 7 that the gate bell rang, and the agent made his appearance. He was a foreigner with a dark beard. "Mr. Hartright, Monsieur Rubel," said the Count, introducing us. He took the agent, a foreign spy, in every line of his face, if ever there was one yet, into a corner of the room, whispered some directions to him, and then left us together. Monsieur Rubel, as soon as we were alone, suggested with great politeness that I should favor him with his instructions. I wrote 2 lines to Pesca, authorizing him to deliver my sealed letter to the bearer, directed the note, and handed it to Monsieur Rubel. The agent waited with me till his employer returned, equipped in traveling costume. The Count examined the address of my letter before he dismissed the agent. "I thought so," he said, turning on me with a dark look and altering again in his manner from that moment. He completed his packing, and then sat consulting a traveling map, making entries in his pocketbook, and looking every now and then impatiently at his watch. Not another word, addressed to myself, passed his lips. The near approach of the hour for his departure, and the proof he had seen of the communication established between Pesca and myself, had plainly recalled his whole attention to the measures that were necessary for securing his escape. A little before 8 o'clock, Monsieur Rubel came back with my unopened letter in his hand. The Count looked carefully at the superscription and the seal, lit a candle, and burnt the letter. "I perform my promise," he said, "but this matter, Mr. Hartright, shall not end here." The agent had kept at the door the cab in which he had returned. He and the maidservant now busied themselves in removing the luggage. Madame Fosco came downstairs, thickly veiled, with the traveling cage of the white mice in her hand. She neither spoke to me nor looked towards me. Her husband escorted her to the cab. "Follow me as far as the passage," he whispered in my ear. "I may want to speak to you at the last moment." I went out to the door, the agent standing below me in the front garden. The Count came back alone and drew me a few steps inside the passage. "Remember the 3rd condition," he whispered. "You shall hear from me, Mr. Hartright. I may claim from you the satisfaction of a gentleman sooner than you think for." He caught my hand before I was aware of him and wrung it hard, then turned to the door, stopped, and came back to me again. "One word more," he said confidentially. "When I last saw Miss Halcombe, she looked thin and ill. I am anxious about that admirable woman. Take care of her, sir. With my hand on my heart, I solemnly implore you, take care of Miss Halcombe." Those were the last words he said to me, before he squeezed his huge body into the cab and drove off. The agent and I waited at the door a few moments looking after him. While we were standing together, a second cab appeared from a turning a little way down the road. It followed the direction previously taken by the Count's cab, and as it passed the house and the open garden gate, a person inside looked at us out of the window. The stranger at the opera again, the foreigner with a scar on his left cheek. "You wait here with me, sir, for half an hour more," said Monsieur Rubel. "I do." We returned to the sitting room. I was in no humor to speak to the agent, or to allow him to speak to me. I took out the papers which the Count had placed in my hands, and read the terrible story of the conspiracy told by the man who had planned and perpetrated it. 8. When I reached home again, after my interview with Mrs. Clements, I was struck by the appearance of a change in Laura. The unvarying gentleness and patience which long misfortune had tried so cruelly and had never conquered yet, seemed now to have suddenly failed her. Insensible to all Marian's attempts to soothe and amuse her, she sat, with her neglected drawing pushed away on the table, her eyes resolutely cast down, her fingers twining and untwining themselves restlessly in her lap. Marian rose when I came in, with a silent distress in her face, waited for a moment to see if Laura would look up at my approach, whispered to me, "Try if you can rouse her," and left the room. I sat down in the vacant chair, gently unclasped the poor, worn, restless fingers, and took both her hands in mine. "What are you thinking of, Laura? Tell me, my darling, try and tell me what it is." She struggled with herself and raised her eyes to mine. "I can't feel happy," she said. "I can't help thinking." She stopped, bent forward a little, and laid her head on my shoulder, with a terrible mute helplessness that struck me to the heart. "Try to tell me," I repeated gently, "try to tell me why you are not happy." "I am so useless, I am such a burden on both of you," she answered, with a weary, hopeless sigh. "You work and get money, Walter and Marian helps you. Why is there nothing I can do? You will end in liking Marian better than you like me, you will, because I am so helpless. Oh, don't treat me like a child." I raised her head and smoothed away the tangled hair that fell over her face and kissed her, my poor, faded flower. My lost, afflicted sister. "You shall help us, Laura," I said. "You shall begin, my darling, today." She looked at me with a feverish eagerness, with a breathless interest, that made me tremble for the new life of hope which I had called into being by those few words. I rose and set her drawing materials in order, and placed them near her again. "You know that I work and get money by drawing," I said. "Now you have taken such pains, now you are so much improved, you shall begin to work and get money too. Try to finish this little sketch as nicely and prettily as you can. When it is done, I will take it away with me, and the same person will buy it who buys all that I do. You shall keep your own earnings in your own purse, and Marian shall come to you to help us, as often as she comes to me. Think how useful you are going to make yourself to both of us, and you will soon be as happy, Laura, as the day is long." Her face grew eager and brightened into a smile. In the moment while it lasted, in the moment when she again took up the pencils that had been laid aside, she almost looked like the Laura of past days. I had rightly interpreted the first signs of a new growth and strength in her mind, unconsciously expressing themselves in the notice she had taken of the occupations which filled her sister's life and mine. Marian, when I told her what had passed, saw, as I saw, that she was longing to assume her own little position of importance, to raise herself in her own estimation and in ours, and from that day we tenderly helped the new ambition which gave promise of the hopeful, happier future that might now not be far off. Her drawings, as she finished them or tried to finish them, were placed in my hands. Marian took them from me and hid them carefully, and I set aside a little weekly tribute from my earnings, to be offered to her as the price paid by strangers for the poor, faint, valueless sketches, of which I was the only purchaser. It was hard sometimes to maintain our innocent deception, when she proudly brought out her purse to contribute her share towards the expenses, and wondered with serious interest whether I or she had earned the most that week. I have all those hidden drawings in my possession still. They are my treasures beyond price, the dear remembrances that I love to keep alive, the friends in past adversity that my heart will never part from, my tenderness never forget. Am I trifling here with the necessities of my task? Am I looking forward to the happier time, which my narrative has not yet reached? Yes. Back again, back to the days of doubt and dread, when the spirit within me struggled hard for its life, in the icy stillness of perpetual suspense. I have paused and rested for a while on my forward course. It is not, perhaps, time wasted, if the friends who read these pages have paused and rested too. I took the first opportunity I could find of speaking to Marian in private, and of communicating to her the result of the inquiries which I had made that morning. She seemed to share the opinion on the subject of my proposed journey to Welmingham, which Mrs. Clements had already expressed to me. "Surely, Walter," she said, "you hardly know enough yet to give you any hope of claiming Mrs. Catherick's confidence. Is it wise to proceed to these extremities before you have really exhausted all safer and simpler means of attaining your object? When you told me that Sir Percival and the Count were the only two people in existence who knew the exact date of Laura's journey, you forgot, and I forgot, that there was a third person who must surely know it. I mean Mrs. Rubel. Would it not be far easier, and far less dangerous, to insist on a confession from her than to force it from Sir Percival?" "It might be easier," I replied, "but we are not aware of the full extent of Mrs. Rubel's connivance and interest in the conspiracy, and we are therefore not certain that the date has been impressed on her mind, as it has been assuredly impressed on the minds of Sir Percival and the Count. It is too late now to waste the time on Mrs. Rubel, which may be all-important to the discovery of the one assailable point in Sir Percival's life. Are you thinking a little too seriously, Marian, of the risk I may run in returning to Hampshire? Are you beginning to doubt whether Sir Percival Glyde may not in the end be more than a match for me?" "He will not be more than your match," she replied decidedly, "because he will not be helped in resisting you by the impenetrable wickedness of the Count." "What has led you to that conclusion?" I replied in some surprise. "My own knowledge of Sir Percival's obstinacy and impatience of the Count's control," she answered. "I believe he will insist on meeting you single-handed, just as he insisted at first on acting for himself at Blackwater Park. The time for suspecting the Count's interference will be the time when you have Sir Percival at your mercy. His own interests will then be directly threatened, and he will act, Walter, to terrible purpose in his own defense. We may deprive him of his weapons beforehand," I said. "Some of the particulars I have heard from Mrs. Clements may yet be turned to account against him, and other means of strengthening the case may be at our disposal. There are passages in Mrs. Michelson's narrative which show that the Count found it necessary to place himself in communication with Mr. Fairley, and there may be circumstances which compromise him in that proceeding. While I am away, Marian, write to Mr. Fairley, and say that you want an answer describing exactly what passed between the Count and himself, and informing you also of any particulars that may have come to his knowledge at the same time in connection with his niece. Tell him that the statement you request will, sooner or later, be insisted on, if he shows any reluctance to furnish you with it of his own accord. The letter shall be written, Walter. But are you really determined to go to Welmingham?" "Absolutely determined. I will devote the next 2 days to earning what we want for the week to come, and on the third day I go to Hampshire." When the third day came, I was ready for my journey. As it was possible that I might be absent for some little time, I arranged with Marian that we were to correspond every day, of course addressing each other by assumed names, for caution's sake. As long as I heard from her regularly, I should assume that nothing was wrong. But if the morning came and brought me no letter, my return to London would take place, as a matter of course, by the first train. I contrived to reconcile Laura to my departure by telling her that I was going to the country to find new purchasers for her drawings and for mine, and I left her occupied and happy. Marian followed me downstairs to the street door. "Remember what anxious hearts you leave here," she whispered, as we stood together in the passage. "Remember all the hopes that hang on your safe return. If strange things happen to you on this journey, if you and Sir Percival meet—" "What makes you think we shall meet?" I asked. "I don't know. I have fears and fancies that I cannot account for." "Laugh at them, Walter, if you like, but for God's sake, keep your temper if you come in contact with that man." "Never fear, Marian. I answer for my self-control." With those words, we parted. I walked briskly to the station. There was a glow of hope in me. There was a growing conviction in my mind that my journey this time would not be taken in vain. It was a fine, clear, cold morning. My nerves were firmly strung, and I felt all the strength of my resolution stirring in me vigorously from head to foot. As I crossed the railway platform and looked right and left among the people congregated on it, to search for any faces among them that I knew, the doubt occurred to me whether it might not have been to my advantage if I had adopted a disguise before setting out for Hampshire. But there was something so repellent to me in the idea, something so meanly like the common herd of spies and informers in the mere act of adopting a disguise, that I dismissed the question from consideration almost as soon as it had risen in my mind. Even as a mere matter of expediency, the proceeding was doubtful in the extreme. If I tried the experiment at home, the landlord of the house would sooner or later discover me, and would have his suspicions aroused immediately. If I tried it away from home, the same persons might see me, by the commonest accident, with the disguise and without it, and I should in that way be inviting the notice and distrust which it was my most pressing interest to avoid. In my own character, I had acted thus far, and in my own character, I was resolved to continue to the end. The train left me at Welmingham early in the afternoon. Is there any wilderness of sand in the deserts of Arabia? Is there any prospect of desolation among the ruins of Palestine, which can rival the repelling effect on the eye and the depressing influence on the mind of an English country town in the first stage of its existence and in the transition state of its prosperity? I asked myself that question as I passed through the clean desolation, the neat ugliness, the prim torpor of the streets of Welmingham, and the tradesmen who stared after me from their lonely shops, the trees that drooped helpless in their arid exile of unfinished crescents and squares, the dead house carcasses that waited in vain for the vivifying human element to animate them with the breath of life. Every creature that I saw, every object that I passed, seemed to answer with one accord. The deserts of Arabia are innocent of our civilized desolation. The ruins of Palestine are incapable of our modern gloom. I inquired my way to the quarter of the town in which Mrs. Catterick lived, and on reaching it found myself in a square of small houses, 1 story high. There was a bare little plot of grass in the middle, protected by a cheap wire fence. An elderly nursemaid and 2 children were standing in a corner of the enclosure, looking at a lean goat tethered to the grass. 2 foot passengers were talking together on one side of the pavement before the houses, and an idle little boy was leading an idle little dog along by a string on the other. I heard the dull tinkling of a piano at a distance, accompanied by the intermittent knocking of a hammer nearer at hand. These were all the sights and sounds of life that encountered me when I entered the square. I walked at once to the door of number 13, the number of Mrs. Catterick's house, and knocked, without waiting to consider beforehand how I might best present myself when I got in. The first necessity was to see Mrs. Catterick. I could then judge, from my own observation, of the safest and easiest manner of approaching the object of my visit. The door was opened by a melancholy middle-aged woman servant. I gave her my card and asked if I could see Mrs. Catterick. The card was taken into the front parlor, and the servant returned with a message requesting me to mention what my business was. Say, if you please, that my business relates to Mrs. Catterick's daughter, I replied. This was the best pretext I could think of, on the spur of the moment, to account for my visit. The servant again retired to the parlor, again returned, and this time begged me, with a look of gloomy amazement, to walk in. I entered a little room, with a flaring paper of the largest pattern on the walls. Chairs, tables, chiffonier, and sofa all gleamed with the glutinous brightness of cheap upholstery. On the largest table in the middle of the room stood a smart Bible, placed exactly in the center on a red and yellow woolen mat, and at the side of the table nearest to the window, with a little knitting basket on her lap and a wheezing, blear-eyed old spaniel crouched at her feet, there sat an elderly woman, wearing a black net cap and a black silk gown, and having slate-colored mittens on her hands. Her iron-gray hair hung in heavy bands on either side of her face. Her dark eyes looked straight forward, with a hard, defiant, implacable stare. She had full square cheeks, a long, firm chin, and thick, sensual, colorless lips. Her figure was stout and sturdy, and her manner aggressively self-possessed. This was Mrs. Catherick. "You have come to speak to me about my daughter," she said, before could utter a word on my side. "Be so good as to mention what you have to say." The tone of her voice was as hard, as defiant, as implacable as the expression of her eyes. She pointed to a chair and looked me all over attentively, from head to foot, as I sat down in it. I saw that my only chance with this woman was to speak to her in her own tone, and to meet her, at the outset of our interview, on her own ground. "You are aware," I said, "that your daughter has been lost." "I am perfectly aware of it." "Have you felt any apprehension that the misfortune of her loss might be followed by the misfortune of her death?" "Yes." "Have you come here to tell me she is dead?" "I have." "Why?" She put that extraordinary question without the slightest change in her voice, her face, or her manner. She could not have appeared more perfectly unconcerned if I had told her of the death of the goat in the enclosure outside. "Why?" I repeated. "Do you ask why I come here to tell you of your daughter's death?" "Yes." "What interest have you in me, or in her? How do you come to know anything about my daughter?" "In this way. I met her on the night when she escaped from the asylum, and I assisted her in reaching a place of safety." "You did very wrong." "I am sorry to hear her mother say so." "Her mother does say so." "How do you know she is dead?" "I am not at liberty to say how I know it, but I do know it." "Are you at liberty to say how you found out my address?" "Certainly." "I got your address from Mrs. Clements." "Mrs. Clements is a foolish woman." "Did she tell you to come here?" "She did not." "Then, I ask you again, why did you come?" As she was determined to have her answer, I gave it to her in the plainest possible form. "I came," I said, "because I thought Anne Catherick's mother might have some natural interest in knowing whether she was alive or dead." "Just so," said Mrs. Catherick, with additional self-possession. "Had you no other motive?" I hesitated. The right answer to that question was not easy to find at a moment's notice. "If you have no other motive," she went on, deliberately taking off her slate-colored mittens and rolling them up, "I have only to thank you for your visit and to say that I will not detain you here any longer. Your information would be more satisfactory if you were willing to explain how you became possessed of it. However, it justifies me, I suppose, in going into mourning. There is not much alteration necessary in my dress, as you see. When I have changed my mittens, I shall be all in black." She searched in the pocket of her gown, drew out a pair of black lace mittens, put them on with the stoniest and steadiest composure, and then quietly crossed her hands in her lap. "I wish you good morning," she said. The cool contempt of her manner irritated me into directly avowing that the purpose of my visit had not been answered yet. "I have another motive in coming here," I said. "Ah." "I thought so," remarked Mrs. Catherick. "Your daughter's death. What did she die of?" "Of disease of the heart." "Yes." "Go on." "Your daughter's death has been made the pretext for inflicting serious injury on a person who is very dear to me. 2 men have been concerned, to my certain knowledge, in doing that wrong. One of them is Sir Percival Glyde." "Indeed." I looked attentively to see if she flinched at the sudden mention of that name. Not a muscle of her stirred. The hard, defiant, implacable stare in her eyes never wavered for an instant. "You may wonder," I went on, "how the event of your daughter's death can have been made the means of inflicting injury on another person." "No," said Mrs. Catherick, "I don't wonder at all. This appears to be your affair. You are interested in my affairs. I am not interested in yours. You may ask, then," I persisted, "why I mention the matter in your presence." "Yes, I do ask that. I mention it because I am determined to bring Sir Percival Glyde to account for the wickedness he has committed." "What have I to do with your determination?" "You shall hear. There are certain events in Sir Percival's past life which it is necessary for my purpose to be fully acquainted with. You know them, and for that reason I come to you." "What events do you mean?" "Events that occurred at Old Welmingham when your husband was parish clerk at that place, and before the time when your daughter was born." I had reached the woman at last through the barrier of impenetrable reserve that she had tried to set up between us. I saw her temper smoldering in her eyes, as plainly as I saw her hands grow restless, then unclasp themselves, and begin mechanically smoothing her dress over her knees. "What do you know of those events?" she asked. "All that Mrs. Clements could tell me," I answered. There was a momentary flush on her firm, square face, a momentary stillness in her restless hands, which seemed to betoken a coming outburst of anger that might throw her off her guard. But no, she mastered the rising irritation, leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms on her broad bosom, and with a smile of grim sarcasm on her thick lips, looked at me as steadily as ever. I begin to understand it all now," she said, her tamed and disciplined anger only expressing itself in the elaborate mockery of her tone and manner. "You have got a grudge of your own against Sir Percival Glyde, and I must help you to wreak it. I must tell you this, that, and the other about Sir Percival and myself, must I?" "Yes, indeed. You have been prying into my private affairs. You think you have found a lost woman to deal with, who lives here on sufferance, and who will do anything you ask for fear you may injure her in the opinions of the townspeople. I see through you and your precious speculation, I do. And it amuses me." Huh. She stopped for a moment, her arms tightened over her bosom, and she laughed to herself, a hard, harsh, angry laugh. "You don't know how I have lived in this place, and what I have done in this place, Mr. What's-your-name?" she went on. "I'll tell you, before I ring the bell and have you shown out. I came here a wronged woman, came here robbed of my character and determined to claim it back. I've been years and years about it, and I have claimed it back. I have matched the respectable people fairly and openly on their own ground. If they say anything against me now, they must say it in secret. They can't say it, they daren't say it openly. I stand high enough in this town to be out of your reach. The clergyman bows to me. You didn't bargain for that when you came here. Go to the church and inquire about me. You will find Mrs. Catherick has her sitting like the rest of them, and pays the rent on the day it's due. Go to the town hall. There's a petition lying there, a petition of the respectable inhabitants against allowing a circus to come and perform here and corrupt our morals. Yes, our morals. I signed that petition this morning. Go to the bookseller's shop. The clergyman's Wednesday evening lectures on justification by faith are publishing there by subscription. I'm down on the list. The doctor's wife only put a shilling in the plate at our last charity sermon. I put half a crown. Mr. Churchwarden Soward held the plate and bowed to me. 10 years ago, he told Pigram, the chemist, I ought to be whipped out of the town at the cart's tail. Is your mother alive? Has she got a better Bible on her table than I have got on mine? Does she stand better with her trades, people, than I do with mine? Has she always lived within her income? I have always lived within mine. There is the clergyman coming along the square. Look, Mr. What's-your-name, look, if you please. She started up with the activity of a young woman, went to the window, waited till the clergyman passed, and bowed to him solemnly. The clergyman ceremoniously raised his hat and walked on. Mrs. Catherick returned to her chair and looked at me with a grimmer sarcasm than ever. There, she said. What do you think of that for a woman with a lost character? How does your speculation look now? The singular manner in which she had chosen to assert herself, the extraordinary practical vindication of her position in the town which she had just offered, had so perplexed me that I listened to her in silent surprise. I was not the less resolved, however, to make another effort to throw her off her guard. If the woman's fierce temper once got beyond her control, and once flamed out on me, she might yet say the words which would put the clue in my hands. How does your speculation look now? She repeated. Exactly as it looked when I first came in, I answered. I don't doubt the position you have gained in the town, and I don't wish to assail it even if I could. I came here because Sir Percival Glyde is, to my certain knowledge, your enemy as well as mine. If I have a grudge against him, you have a grudge against him too. You may deny it if you like, you may distrust me as much as you please, you may be as angry as you will, but, of all the women in England, You, if you have any sense of injury, are the woman who ought to help me to crush that man. Crush him for yourself, she said, then come back here and see what I say to you. She spoke those words as she had not spoken yet, quickly, fiercely, vindictively. I had stirred in its lair the serpent hatred of years, but only for a moment. Like a lurking reptile, it leaped up at me, as she eagerly bent forward towards the place in which I was sitting. Like a lurking reptile, it dropped out of sight again, as she instantly resumed her former position in the chair. You won't trust me, I said. No. You are afraid. Do I look as if I was? You are afraid of Sir Percival Glyde. Am I? Her color was rising, and her hands were at work again smoothing her gown. I pressed the point farther and farther home. I went on without allowing her a moment of delay. Sir Percival has a high position in the world, I said. It would be no wonder if you were afraid of him. Sir Percival is a powerful man, a baronet, the possessor of a fine estate, the descendant of a great family. She amazed me beyond expression by suddenly bursting out laughing. Yes, she repeated, in tones of the bitterest, steadiest contempt. A baronet, the possessor of a fine estate, the descendant of a great family. Yes, indeed. A great family, especially by the mother's side. There was no time to reflect on the words that had just escaped her. There was only time to feel that they were well worth thinking over the moment I left the house. I am not here to dispute with you about family questions, I said. I know nothing of Sir Percival's mother. And you know as little of Sir Percival himself, she interposed sharply. I advise you not to be too sure of that, I rejoined. I know some things about him, and I suspect many more. What do you suspect? I'll tell you what I don't suspect. I don't suspect him of being Anne's father. She started to her feet and came close up to me with a look of fury. How dare you talk to me about Anne's father? How dare you say who was her father or who was? She broke out, her face quivering, her voice trembling with passion. The secret between you and Sir Percival is not that secret, persisted. The mystery which darkens Sir Percival's life was not born with your daughter's birth, and has not died with your daughter's death. She drew back a step. Go, she said, and pointed sternly to the door. There was no thought of the child in your heart or in his. I went on, determined to press her back to her last defenses. There was no bond of guilty love between you and him when you held those stolen meetings, when your husband found you whispering together under the vestry of the church. Her pointing hand instantly dropped to her side, and the deep flush of anger faded from her face while I spoke. I saw the change pass over her. I saw that hard, firm, fearless, self-possessed woman quail under a terror which her utmost resolution was not strong enough to resist when I said those 5 last words. The vestry of the church. For a minute or more, we stood looking at each other in silence. I spoke first. Do you still refuse to trust me? I asked. She could not call the color that had left it back to her face, but she had steadied her voice, she had recovered the defiant self-possession of her manner when she answered me. I do refuse, she said. Do you still tell me to go? Yes. Go and never come back. I walked to the door, waited a moment before I opened it, and turned round to look at her again. I may have news to bring you of Sir Percival which you don't expect, I said, and in that case I shall come back. There is no news of Sir Percival that I don't expect, except. She stopped, her pale face darkened, and she stole back with a quiet, stealthy, cat-like step to her chair. Except the news of his death, she said, sitting down again, with the mockery of a smile just hovering on her cruel lips, and the furtive light of hatred lurking deep in her steady eyes. As I opened the door of the room to go out, she looked round at me quickly. The cruel smile slowly widened her lips. She eyed me, with a strange, stealthy interest, from head to foot. An unutterable expectation showed itself wickedly all over her face. Was she speculating, in the secrecy of her own heart, on my youth and strength, on the force of my sense of injury and the limits of my self-control? And was she considering the lengths to which they might carry me, if Sir Percival and I ever chanced to meet? The bare doubt that it might be so drove me from her presence, and silenced even the common forms of farewell on my lips. Without a word more, on my side or on hers, I left the room. As I opened the outer door, I saw the same clergyman who had already passed the house once, about to pass it again, on his way back through the square. I waited on the doorstep to let him go by, and looked round, as I did so, at the parlor window. Mrs. Catherick had heard his footsteps approaching in the silence of that lonely place, and she was on her feet at the window again, waiting for him. Not all the strength of all the terrible passions I had roused in that woman's heart could loosen her desperate hold on the one fragment of social consideration which years of resolute effort had just dragged within her grasp. There she was again, not a minute after I had left her, placed purposely in a position which made it a matter of common courtesy on the part of the clergyman to bow to her for a second time. He raised his hat once more. I saw the hard, ghastly face behind the window soften and light up with gratified pride. I saw the head with the grim black cap bend ceremoniously in return. The clergyman had bowed to her, and in my presence, twice in one day. 9. I left the house, feeling that Mrs. Catherick had helped me a step forward, in spite of herself. Before I had reached the turning which led out of the square, my attention was suddenly aroused by the sound of a closing door behind me. I looked round and saw an undersized man in black on the doorstep of a house, which, as well as I could judge, stood next to Mrs. Catherick's place of abode, next to it, on the side nearest to me. The man did not hesitate a moment about the direction he should take. He advanced rapidly towards the turning at which I had stopped. I recognized him as the lawyer's clerk who had preceded me in my visit to Blackwater Park and who had tried to pick a quarrel with me when asked him if I could see the house. I waited where I was to ascertain whether his object was to come to close quarters and speak on this occasion. To my surprise, he passed on rapidly, without saying a word, without even looking up in my face as he went by. This was such a complete inversion of the course of proceeding which I had every reason to expect on his part, that my curiosity, or rather my suspicion, was aroused, and I determined on my side to keep him cautiously in view, and to discover what the business might be in which he was now employed. Without caring whether he saw me or not, I walked after him. He never looked back, and he led me straight through the streets to the railway station. The train was on the point of starting, and 2 or 3 passengers who were late were clustering round the small opening through which the tickets were issued. I joined them, and distinctly heard the lawyer's clerk demand a ticket for the Blackwater station. I satisfied myself that he had actually left by the train before I came away. There was only one interpretation that I could place on what I had just seen and heard. I had unquestionably observed the man leaving a house, which closely adjoined Mrs. Catherick's residence. He had been probably placed there by Sir Percival's directions as a lodger, in anticipation of my inquiries leading me, sooner or later, to communicate with Mrs. Catherick. He had doubtless seen me go in and come out, and he had hurried away by the first train to make his report at Blackwater Park, to which place Sir Percival would naturally betake himself, knowing what he evidently knew of my movements, in order to be ready on the spot if I returned to Hampshire. Before many days were over, there seemed every likelihood now that he and I might meet. Whatever result events might be destined to produce, I resolved to pursue my own course, straight to the end in view, without stopping or turning aside for Sir Percival or for anyone. The great responsibility which weighed on me heavily in London, the responsibility of so guiding my slightest actions as to prevent them from leading accidentally to the discovery of Laura's place of refuge, was removed now that I was in Hampshire. I could go and come as I pleased at Welmingham, and if I chanced to fail in observing any necessary precautions, the immediate results, at least, would affect no one but myself. When I left the station, the winter evening was beginning to close in. There was little hope of continuing my inquiries after dark to any useful purpose in a neighborhood that was strange to me. Accordingly, I made my way to the nearest hotel and ordered my dinner and my bed. This done, I wrote to Marian to tell her that I was safe and well, and that I had fair prospects of success. I had directed her, on leaving home, to address the first letter she wrote to me, the letter, expected to receive the next morning, to the post office, Welmingham, and I now begged her to send her second day's letter to the same address. I could easily receive it by writing to the postmaster if I happened to be away from the town when it arrived. The coffee room of the hotel, as it grew late in the evening, became a perfect solitude. I was left to reflect on what I had accomplished that afternoon as uninterruptedly as if the house had been my own. Before I retired to rest, I had attentively thought over my extraordinary interview with Mrs. Catterick from beginning to end, and had verified at my leisure the conclusions which I had hastily drawn in the earlier part of the day. The vestry of Old Welmingham Church was the starting point from which my mind slowly worked its way back through all that I had heard Mrs. Catterick say and through all I had seen Mrs. Catterick do. At the time when the neighborhood of the vestry was first referred to in my presence by Mrs. Clements, I had thought it the strangest and most unaccountable of all places for Sir Percival to select for a clandestine meeting with the clerk's wife. Influenced by this impression, and by no other, I had mentioned the vestry of the church before Mrs. Catterick on pure speculation. It represented one of the minor peculiarities of the story which occurred to me while I was speaking. I was prepared for her answering me confusedly or angrily, but the blank terror that seized her when I said the words took me completely by surprise. I had long before associated Sir Percival's secret with the concealment of a serious crime which Mrs. Catterick knew of, but I had gone no further than this. Now the woman's paroxysm of terror associated the crime, either directly or indirectly, with the vestry, and convinced me that she had been more than the mere witness of it. She was also the accomplice, beyond a doubt. What had been the nature of the crime? Surely there was a contemptible side to it, as well as a dangerous side, or Mrs. Catterick would not have repeated my own words, referring to Sir Percival's rank and power, with such marked disdain as she had certainly displayed. It was a contemptible crime then, and a dangerous crime, and she had shared in it, and it was associated with the vestry of the church. The next consideration to be disposed of led me a step farther from this point. Mrs. Catterick's undisguised contempt for Sir Percival plainly extended to his mother as well. She had referred with the bitterest sarcasm to the great family he had descended from, especially by the mother's side. What did this mean? There appeared to be only two explanations of it. Either his mother's birth had been low, or his mother's reputation was damaged by some hidden flaw with which Mrs. Catterick and Sir Percival were both privately acquainted. I could only put the first explanation to the test by looking at the register of her marriage, and so ascertaining her maiden name and her parentage as a preliminary to further inquiries. On the other hand, if the second case supposed were the true one, what had been the flaw in her reputation? Remembering the account which Marian had given me of Sir Percival's father and mother, and of the suspiciously unsocial secluded life they had both led, I now asked myself whether it might not be possible that his mother had never been married at all. Here again the register might, by offering written evidence of the marriage, prove to me, at any rate, that this doubt had no foundation in truth. But where was the register to be found? At this point, I took up the conclusions which I had previously formed, and the same mental process which had discovered the locality of the concealed crime now lodged the register also in the vestry of Old Welmingham Church. These were the results of my interview with Mrs. Catterick. These were the various considerations, all steadily converging to one point, which decided the course of my proceedings on the next day. The morning was cloudy and lowering, but no rain fell. I left my bag at the hotel to wait there till I called for it, and after inquiring the way, set forth on foot for Old Welmingham Church. It was a walk of rather more than 2 miles, the ground rising slowly all the way. On the highest point stood the church, an ancient, weather-beaten building, with heavy buttresses at its sides and a clumsy square tower in front. The vestry at the back was built out from the church, and seemed to be of the same age. Round the building at intervals appeared the remains of the village which Mrs. Clements had described to me as her husband's place of abode in former years, and which the principal inhabitants had long since deserted for the new town. Some of the empty houses had been dismantled to their outer walls, some had been left to decay with time, and some were still inhabited by persons evidently of the poorest class. It was a dreary scene, and yet, in the worst aspect of its ruin, not so dreary as the modern town that I had just left. Here there was the brown, breezy sweep of surrounding fields for the eye to repose on. Here the trees, leafless as they were, still varied the monotony of the prospect, and helped the mind to look forward to summertime and shade. As I moved away from the back of the church, and past some of the dismantled cottages in search of a person who might direct me to the clerk, I saw two men saunter out after me from behind a wall. The tallest of the two, a stout muscular man in the dress of a gamekeeper, was a stranger to me. The other was one of the men who had followed me in London on the day when I left Mr. Keel's office. I had taken particular notice of him at the time, and I felt sure that I was not mistaken in identifying the fellow on this occasion. Neither he nor his companion attempted to speak to me, and both kept themselves at a respectful distance, but the motive of their presence in the neighborhood of the church was plainly apparent. It was exactly as I had supposed. Sir Percival was already prepared for me. My visit to Mrs. Catherick had been reported to him the evening before, and those two men had been placed on the lookout near the church in anticipation of my appearance at Old Welmingham. If I had wanted any further proof that my investigations had taken the right direction at last, the plan now adopted for watching me would have supplied it. I walked on away from the church till I reached one of the inhabited houses, with a patch of kitchen garden attached to it on which a laborer was at work. He directed me to the clerk's abode, a cottage at some little distance off, standing by itself on the outskirts of the forsaken village. The clerk was indoors and was just putting on his greatcoat. He was a cheerful, familiar, loudly talkative old man, with a very poor opinion, as I soon discovered, of the place in which he lived, and a happy sense of superiority to his neighbors in virtue of the great personal distinction of having once been in London. "It's well you came so early, sir," said the old man, when I had mentioned the object of my visit. "I should have been away in 10 minutes more. Parish business, sir, and a goodish long trot before it's all done for a man at my age. But bless you, I'm strong on my legs still. As long as a man don't give at his legs, there's a deal of work left in him. Don't you think so yourself, sir?" He took his keys down while he was talking from a hook behind the fireplace, and locked his cottage door behind us. "Nobody at home to keep house for me," said the clerk, with a cheerful sense of perfect freedom from all family encumbrances. "My wife is in the churchyard there, and my children are all married. A wretched place this, isn't it, sir? But the parish is a large one. Every man couldn't get through the business as I do. It's learning does it, and I've had my share and a little more. I can talk the Queen's English, God bless the Queen, and that's more than most of the people about here can do. You're from London, I suppose, sir?" "I've been in London a matter of 25 years ago." "What's the news there now, if you please?" Chattering on in this way, he led me back to the vestry. I looked about to see if the two spies were still in sight. They were not visible anywhere. After having discovered my application to the clerk, they had probably concealed themselves where they could watch my next proceedings in perfect freedom. The vestry door was of stout old oak, studded with strong nails, and the clerk put his large heavy key into the lock with the air of a man who knew that he had a difficulty to encounter, and who was not quite certain of creditably conquering it. "I'm obliged to bring you this way, sir," he said, "because the door from the vestry to the church is bolted on the vestry side. We might have got in through the church otherwise. This is a perverse lock, if ever there was one yet. It's big enough for a prison door. It's been hampered over and over again, and it ought to be changed for a new one. I've mentioned that to the churchwarden 50 times over at least. He's always saying, 'I'll see about it,' and he never does see. Ah, it's a sort of lost corner, this place. Not like London, is it, sir? Bless you, we are all asleep here. We don't march with the times." After some twisting and turning of the key, the heavy lock yielded, and he opened the door. The vestry was larger than I should have supposed it to be, judging from the outside only. It was a dim, moldy, melancholy old room, with a low, raftered ceiling. Round two sides of it, the sides nearest to the interior of the church, ran heavy wooden presses, worm-eaten and gaping with age. Hooked to the inner corner of one of these presses hung several surplices, all bulging out at their lower ends in an irreverent-looking bundle of limp drapery. Below the surplices on the floor stood 3 packing cases, with the lids half off, half on, and the straw profusely bursting out of their cracks and crevices in every direction. Behind them, in a corner, was a litter of dusty papers, some large and rolled up like architects' plans, some loosely strung together on files like bills or letters. The room had once been lighted by a small side window, but this had been bricked up, and a lantern skylight was now substituted for it. The atmosphere of the place was heavy and moldy, being rendered additionally oppressive by the closing of the door which led into the church. This door also was composed of solid oak, and was bolted at the top and bottom on the vestry side. "We might be tidier, mightn't we, sir?" said the cheerful clerk, "but when you're in a lost corner of a place like this, what are you to do? Why, look here now, just look at these packing cases. There they've been for a year or more, ready to go down to London. There they are, littering the place, and there they'll stop as long as the nails hold them together. I'll tell you what, sir, as I said before, this is not London. We are all asleep here. Bless you, we don't march with the times." "What is there in the packing cases?" I asked. "Bits of old wood carvings from the pulpit, and panels from the chancel, and images from the organ loft," said the clerk. "Portraits of the 12 apostles in wood, and not a whole nose among 'em. All broken and worm-eat, and crumbling to dust at the edges. As brittle as crockery, sir, and as old as the church, if not older." "And why were they going to London?" "To be repaired." "That's it, sir, to be repaired, and where they were past repair, to be copied in sound wood. But bless you, the money fell short, and there they are, waiting for new subscriptions, and nobody to subscribe. It was all done a year ago, sir. 6 gentlemen dined together about it, at the hotel in the new town. They made speeches, and passed resolutions, and put their names down, and printed off thousands of prospectuses. Beautiful prospectuses, sir, all flourished over with Gothic devices in red ink, saying it was a disgrace not to restore the church and repair the famous carvings, and so on. There are the prospectuses that couldn't be distributed, and the architect's plans and estimates, and the whole correspondence which set everybody at loggerheads and ended in a dispute, all down together in that corner, behind the packing cases. The money dribbled in a little at first, but what can you expect out of London? There was just enough, you know, to pack the broken carvings and get the estimates and pay the printer's bill, and after that there wasn't a halfpenny left. There the things are, as I said before. We have nowhere else to put them. Nobody in the new town cares about accommodating us. We're in a lost corner, and this is an untidy vestry, and who's to help it? That's what I want to know." My anxiety to examine the register did not dispose me to offer much encouragement to the old man's talkativeness. I agreed with him that nobody could help the untidiness of the vestry, and then suggested that we should proceed to our business without more delay. "Aye, the marriage register, to be sure," said the clerk, taking a little bunch of keys from his pocket. "How far do you want to look back, sir?" Marian had informed me of Sir Percival's age at the time, when we had spoken together of his marriage engagement with Laura. She had then described him as being 45 years old. Calculating back from this, and making due allowance for the year that had passed since I had gained my information, I found that he must have been born in 1804, and that I might safely start on my search through the register from that date. "I want to begin with the year 1804, I said. "Which way after that, sir?" asked the clerk. "Forwards to our time, or backwards away from us?" "Backwards from 1804. He opened the door of one of the presses, the press from the side of which the surplices were hanging, and produced a large volume bound in greasy brown leather. I was struck by the insecurity of the place in which the register was kept. The door of the press was warped and cracked with age, and the lock was of the smallest and commonest kind. I could have forced it easily with the walking stick I carried in my hand. "Is that considered a sufficiently secure place for the register?" I inquired. "Surely a book of such importance as this ought to be protected by a better lock, and kept carefully in an iron safe." "Well now, that's curious," said the clerk, shutting up the book again, just after he had opened it, and smacking his hand cheerfully on the cover. Those were the very words my old master was always saying years and years ago, when I was a lad. Why isn't the register, meaning this register here under my hand, why isn't it kept in an iron safe? If I've heard him say that once, I've heard him say it 100 times. He was the solicitor in those days, sir, who had the appointment of vestry clerk to this church. A fine, hearty old gentleman, and the most particular man breathing. As long as he lived, he kept a copy of this book in his office at Knowlesbury, and had it posted up regular, from time to correspond with the fresh entries here. You would hardly think it, but he had his own appointed days, once or twice in every quarter, for riding over to this church on his old white pony, to check the copy, by the register, with his own eyes and hands. How do I know? He used to say, how do I know that the register in this vestry may not be stolen or destroyed? Why isn't it kept in an iron safe? Why can't I make other people as careful as I am myself? Some of these days there will be an accident happen, and when the register's lost, then the parish will find out the value of my copy. He used to take his pinch of snuff after that, and look about him as bold as a lord. The like of him for doing business isn't easy to find now. You may go to London and not match him, even there. Which year did you say, sir? 1800 and what? 1804, I replied, mentally resolving to give the old man no more opportunities of talking, until my examination of the register was over. The clerk put on his spectacles and turned over the leaves of the register, carefully wetting his finger and thumb at every third page. There it is, sir, said he, with another cheerful smack on the open volume. There's the year you want. As I was ignorant of the month in which Sir Percival was born, I began my backward search with the early part of the year. The register book was of the old-fashioned kind, the entries being all made on blank pages in manuscript, and the divisions which separated them being indicated by ink lines drawn across the page at the close of each entry. I reached the beginning of the year 1804 without encountering the marriage, and then traveled back through December 1803, through November and October, through. No, not through September also. Under the heading of that month in the year, I found the marriage. I looked carefully at the entry. It was at the bottom of a page, and was for want of room compressed into a smaller space than that occupied by the marriages above. The marriage immediately before it was impressed on my attention by the circumstance of the bridegroom's Christian name being the same as my own. The entry immediately following it, on the top of the next page, was noticeable in another way from the large space it occupied, the record in this case registering the marriages of two brothers at the same time. The register of the marriage of Sir Felix Glyde was in no respect remarkable, except for the narrowness of the space into which it was compressed at the bottom of the page. The information about his wife was the usual information given in such cases. She was described as Cecilia Jane Elster, of Parkview Cottages, Knowlesbury, only daughter of the late Patrick Elster, Esquire, formerly of Bath. I noted down these particulars in my pocketbook, feeling as I did so both doubtful and disheartened about my next proceedings. The secret which I had believed, until this moment to be within my grasp, seemed now farther from my reach than ever. What suggestions of any mystery unexplained had arisen out of my visit to the vestry? I saw no suggestions anywhere. What progress had I made towards discovering the suspected stain on the reputation of Sir Percival's mother? The one fact I had ascertained vindicated her reputation. Fresh doubts, fresh difficulties, fresh delays began to open before me in interminable prospect. What was I to do next? The one immediate resource left to me appeared to be this. I might institute inquiries about Miss Elster of Knowlesbury, on the chance of advancing towards the main object of my investigation, by first discovering the secret of Mrs. Catherick's contempt for Sir Percival's mother. "Have you found what you wanted, sir?" said the clerk as I closed the register book. "Yes," I replied, "but I have some inquiries still to make. I suppose the clergyman who officiated here in the year 1803 is no longer alive." "No, no, sir. He was dead 3 or 4 years before I came here, and that was as long ago as the year 27. I got this place, sir, persisted my talkative old friend, through the clerk before me leaving it. They say he was driven out of house and home by his wife, and she's living still down in the new town there. I don't know the rights of the story myself. All I know is I got the place. Mr. Wansborough got it for me, the son of my old master that I was telling you of. He's a free, pleasant gentleman as ever lived, rides to the hounds, keeps his pointers and all that. He's vestry clerk here now, as his father was before him. Did you not tell me your former master lived at Knowlesbury? I asked, calling to mind the long story about the precise gentleman of the old school with which my talkative friend had wearied me before he opened the register book. Yes, to be sure, sir, replied the clerk. Old Mr. Wansborough lived at Knowlesbury, and young Mr. Wansborough lives there too. You said just now he was vestry clerk, like his father before him. I am not quite sure that I know what a vestry clerk is. Don't you indeed, sir? And you come from London too. Every parish church, you know, has a vestry clerk and a parish clerk. The parish clerk is a man like me, except that I've got a deal more learning than most of them, though I don't boast of it. The vestry clerk is a sort of an appointment that the lawyers get, and if there's any business to be done for the vestry, why there they are to do it. It's just the same in London. Every parish church there has got its vestry clerk, and you may take my word for it, he's sure to be a lawyer. Then young Mr. Wansborough is a lawyer, I suppose. Of course he is, sir. A lawyer in High Street, Knowlesbury, the old offices that his father had before him. The number of times I've swept those offices out, and seen the old gentleman come trotting in to business on his white pony, looking right and left all down the street and nodding to everybody. Bless you, he was a popular character, he'd have done in London. How far is it to Knowlesbury from this place? A long stretch, sir, said the clerk, with that exaggerated idea of distances, and that vivid perception of difficulties in getting from place to place, which is peculiar to all country people. Nigh on 5 mile, I can tell you. It was still early in the forenoon. There was plenty of time for a walk to Knowlesbury and back again to Welmingham, and there was no person probably in the town who was fitter to assist my inquiries about the character and position of Sir Percival's mother before her marriage than the local solicitor. Resolving to go at once to Knowlesbury on foot, I led the way out of the vestry. Thank you kindly, sir, said the clerk, as I slipped my little present into his hand. Are you really going to walk all the way to Knowlesbury and back? Well, you're strong on your legs, too, and what a blessing that is, isn't it? There's the road, you can't miss it. I wish I was going your way. It's pleasant to meet with gentlemen from London in a lost corner like this. One hears the news. Wish you good morning, sir, and thank you kindly once more. We parted. As I left the church behind me, I looked back, and there were the 2 men again on the road below, with a third in their company. That third person being the short man in black whom I had traced to the railway the evening before. The 3 stood talking together for a little while, then separated. The man in black went away by himself towards Welmingham. The other 2 remained together, evidently waiting to follow me as soon as I walked on. I proceeded on my way, without letting the fellows see that I took any special notice of them. They caused me no conscious irritation of feeling at that moment. On the contrary, they rather revived my sinking hopes. In the surprise of discovering the evidence of the marriage, I had forgotten the inference I had drawn on first perceiving the men in the neighborhood of the vestry. Their reappearance reminded me that Sir Percival had anticipated my visit to Old Welmingham Church as the next result of my interview with Mrs. Catherick, otherwise he would never have placed his spies there to wait for me. Smoothly and fairly as appearances looked in the vestry, there was something wrong beneath them. There was something in the register book, for aught I knew, that I had not discovered yet.